live in the corner.
Okay.
All right, here we are. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our third episode of Every Voice Matters. I have my friend Tevis here with me today, and I just realized we have three T names in a row. We had Tawanda and Tony and Tevis, and so we're on the T streak. But I really thank you. I appreciate you for coming and for being on the show with us today and sharing your story with us and being brave about that. What would you like to tell us about your family?
Well, I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know anything about Kentucky, it was considered a border state. And so we had a large freedmen population as early as 1830 in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, of course, living in separate sections of the city, like Smoketown, Berrytown, Griffeytown, Newburgh. And those were the places where we were allowed to live. And then maybe toward the 50s, they built a few developments. And of course, the covenants were, you couldn't sell to Black people and Black people couldn't move into your area. But they moved some communities out into the county because Ford, GE, and International Harvester had plants. And so, of course, they wanted people to work and live fairly close. So, in the neighborhood that my parents built a home in, it was a little bit of everybody. And so the homes were all different, very small homes and very large homes. There were doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, teachers, people who worked at GM and Ford, those kind of places. So, you just had everybody who was Black, no matter what their station was, they lived in this area. So I went to school at an all white school, and it was just that little pocket of us, bus 32, that went to Fern Creek High School. And I went there from the time I was in the seventh grade to the time I was a senior. So I had a lot of different experiences. When I was much younger, the first time I experienced racism was, I guess I was maybe 5 years old, and we never could go into the stores. We had to sit in the car because, you just could never know what would happen. Your child broke something, you have to pay double for it, or, just sit in the car, avoid trouble. And we could not try on clothes. We always had to buy everything and we could never return them. So there was one gentleman, he was a Jewish store owner. He would actually let Black people try on shoes, but we had to go out back to the loading dock, and he would have a piece of cardboard and a sheet over the piece of cardboard so we could try on their shoes. But my mother had to leave her car keys in the store to bring the shoes out for us to try on. So I can remember being this little tiny kid dancing around on this cardboard and sheet to make sure my shoes fit. And I would just always get so upset because my mother would never pick out the shoes I wanted. She would pick out the shoes she wanted. So Sundays, a big time for us was a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. My mom would make a big pot of green beans, and we would go to the amusement park, not to ride, just to sit at the fence and watch the white people ride. And that's
Yeah.
pretty sad entertainment.
Yeah. That is. I'm sorry, but that is.
But, we weren't allowed in the park. So that was our Sunday afternoon entertainment. So my memories are at a very young age. And of course, you'd go to school and, they'd make you sit in the back of the class. And they had all sorts of different rules for us. But, my folks had already given us the lecture, so to speak.
So what kind of things did your parents say to you? How did they equip you to deal
Well,
with that?
my father taught us that we could do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And his thing was, in, anger and disappointment and hatred should never be a part of your life, because when you're in that mode, you block your blessings. So he taught us that from a very young age. And my mother, she was like, never get upset, never, cry in public, no matter what. Because if you do either or, then you make yourself a bigger target. So, so a lot of times when people say, they're pretty emotionless, the reason being is if we get angry, then we're considered an angry Black woman. And if we cry, we're considered emotionally unstable. So it's just best to just be, to just be.
Mm.
And so I learned that early from my mom. Just what she would tell me is, if you got to cry and be mad, come home and cry and be mad. But don't ever cry and be mad in public, because that just gives them, more fuel to hit with you.
Was that difficult to do? I mean, especially as a child, to be asked to be like less than who you are.
It was hard. I mean, I wanted to be a brownie. My friends at school got to be a brownie, and then when I went, the troop was always full. So I never got to be a Girl Scout or brownie because the troop was always full.
Mm.
So, little things like that. And of course, by us being in this pocket, and there were white people all around us, we played together, but, I couldn't go to the pool, So, we interacted and played, had a good time, but no pool for Tevis and no Fountain Ferry Park, that sort of thing. So you kind of grew up with it and you were used to it. And the one thing about growing up in Kentucky is you knew the rules, And I always tell the story of my grandmother, and what white people really don't realize is Black people don't have any hate for them, because we really share a lot of the same DNA. You know, we first came to this country in 1501 in Virginia. There were Africans here.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the next 300 years, we were coming, Uh, so when people say things like go back to Africa, it's like, well, heck, been here a pretty long time. The blood of my ancestors.
Yeah. You guys go back to Europe then. How about that?
Yeah. So, it's just different. And my grandmother's two brothers were the sons of the farm owner. And her greatest excitement in her life, she only left Louisville, Kentucky one time, and it was going to the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. And they went in a horse and a wagon. And she talked about that till the day she died. And she wasn't scared, and I'll tell you why. Because they would camp outside of town, and a lot of towns had sundown laws. So Black people could not be in the city limits after sundown. If not, you could be arrested or harassed and sometimes even killed. So they came all the way from Louisville to St. Louis, and they camped in their wagon. But her two brothers looked white. So they would make camp, and her brothers would go into town and buy food and fuel or whatever they needed for the lamps and things. And so she would always talk about how it was just so funny, because they would go in town and we have a good old roll of bologna for the night.
I don't know. That's what I would have chosen, but
it was just the fact that, that story of how they traveled, and it took them almost a month to make the trip to St. Louis to the World's Fair and back to Kentucky. So that was the highlight of her life. And of course, she comes back and she contracted polio. So, it was just a lot of events that stuck with her. And then, of course, you knew the rules. You don't look white people in the eye. When they're on the sidewalk, you get off the sidewalk.
So how do you think those rules have changed over time? Like what rules still exist today, and what have we been able to leave behind?
those are no longer the rules that apply when I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you made the mistake, you could be considered disrespectful, and they
Mm-hmm.
try to burn your house down or beat your dad up or something like that. So you just didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't make any waves, and you tried not to walk home, too much. We had a little park, maybe a mile from my house, and always we try to get home before dark because the kids would throw rocks at us and bottles,
Mm-hmm.
saw us on the side of the road. But I say that to say, we still just thrived with the idea that what God has for us is for us. And we really can't be mad. That's what my dad taught us. We can't be angry
Mm-hmm.
or upset because that is their way of making sure we don't succeed. And if you
Well,
follow,
I've been angry and upset recently, and as I've mentioned on here before, I've been trying to educate myself on his history and current events as well and things. But just reading through the post Civil War period up to civil rights, and I know all the tragedy and horror that went on before that, and I at first, like my first just gut visceral reaction was just disgust of how some people can be so cruel for no reason to other people, just like wanting to throw up kind of sickness.
yeah,
But then then the second kind of feeling rose, and I haven't done a good job figuring out how to communicate it yet, but just this like respect for these people who have been through so much over so many centuries, and I feel like you're strong. You're really there's survivors in a way, like not that people today experience that trauma, but it's like cumulative through the centuries. And I just had a whole new respect, a whole new way of looking at. We've come a long way, but not far enough.
yeah.
But just yeah, like I said, I'm not good at communicating it yet. Maybe if I keep practicing, I'll figure out the right words to say what I'm feeling. But
Liz, I don't attribute it to anything but the Lord, because when I would feel myself getting to that place, I would always just say, "Help me, Jesus," and that would just make me take it down a notch.
mm-hmm.
One wrong, as my dad would say, does not make a right.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
excuse me, two wrongs don't make a right. And
Yeah.
so we would kind of work through it like that.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I've been really touched by Corrie Ten Boom's story, from World War II. She was in the concentration camp, and afterwards, she taught on forgiveness and all these kinds of things. And then one day she confronted the man who had like tortured and killed her sister.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just like, Lord, I can't do it. I can't forgive him. I can't. He offered his, he offered a handshake or something. And, but she describes how, Jesus just filled her with his forgiveness, and Jesus forgave that man through her. She didn't have the power to do it on her own. That's always stuck with me. That's a really powerful story of when we don't feel like we have love or acceptance or grace or forgiveness or whatever it is for whatever people or situation we're dealing with, that we don't always have to. God can fill us with that, with his. And your story reminds me of that as well.
And my dad would always say, take it to the Lord and leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, as I said, I had lived in the same neighborhood and gone to that same high school. But the counselors, they just innately felt like we weren't college material, and I don't know if that was their own prejudice or what.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was a teacher, and she held a master's in education. And she would just be so outraged because they would have me in wood shop, band, those kind of classes. And so what she would do, she taught at Central High School. She would bring the assignments that the seniors were doing at the high school to me. And I would just be so mad at her.
Yeah.
I got more homework. I did it. I
Yeah.
followed, and she checked my work, and she did the same for all of us. Just to make sure.
Hmm.
And my senior year, of course, I guess the teachers would get together and have a discussion about which people they would recommend for scholarships.
Hmm.
And I had a colonel in the U.S. Marines that was leading our ROTC unit.
Hmm.
And he just came out of that meeting on fire. And he called me into his office and he said, I want you to know that you are college material. I don't know what went on in the meeting, but
Hmm.
apparently it kind of stoked him a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he said they are opening the military academies to women in the fall. And I know you can get in.
Hmm.
So I ended up getting a nomination from our Kentucky senator, and
Hmm.
I ended up getting into the first class of women at the U.S. Naval Academy.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it was just the fact that people were telling me I couldn't, I couldn't, I couldn't.
Hmm.
There was one person in my life and my mother,
Hmm.
the colonel in our ROTC unit, was like, "Oh no, 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 you can't,
Hmm. You
can't."
can.
can't."
Hmm.
So it worked out for me.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, the 2 weeks before I was supposed to report, July 6th, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And of course, I just couldn't leave, and
Hmm.
pretty adamant that you just can't come back and forth. And December is the only time you get off, in the first
Right.
year. But they said if you want to come, you can come.
Hmm.
So, I didn't, and I feel like that's God moving in my life,
Hmm.
because if I had not gone to the local state school, the University of Kentucky, I would have never met my husband. So I just feel like, he was pulling me along and putting me in situations that he would
Yeah.
want me to be in.
That's neat to hear, because sometimes I'm like, man, why did I go to the Air Force Academy? I should have gone to A&M in Texas. But I come back to the same thing. Well, that's where I met my husband. I have all these great children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to share the story about your husband being a pilot that you told
Oh,
me earlier?
yeah. Well, my husband was very fair, and he was from a single parent family. And of course, he took advantage of the Air Force ROTC scholarship at the University of Kentucky. So his goal was to be a pilot, and we had kind of scraped together our money for him to take pilot lessons so he could be prepared when he got into the Air Force. And unfortunately, he had grown too tall to fly jets, so they put him in helicopters. And his first station was Fort Rucker, Alabama, which that in itself is whew.
Yeah.
But when he shows up the first day, the flight instructor is just marching down the aisles, and he says, it says here, we got us a nigger in this class. We're washing him out in a week. And I was like, well, what did you do? He said, well, I just turned around with the rest of the class and looked at him.
Where is he?
So, we would laugh about that, but he was strong and he got
Mhm.
through. And he was a helicopter pilot in the U.S. Air Force his entire career.
Mhm.
And we both, in our families, unbelievably so, have people who just decided that I don't like being black. It's too hard. And so they just decided to be white. So you don't go visit them. You just don't show up. They come home and visit us. So that was not uncommon in the 60s for
Yeah.
folks just to say, I can't do this. And
I didn't realize that was like an option.
there are people who walk among you who are.
Mhm. You make it sound so ominous. I mean, that's a great thing. That real quick reminds me of, I meant to say this at the beginning of the show, but I wanted to I'm trying to recommend resources to people. So this is a book that I've been reading called Black Like Me. Have you read it?
Yeah.
So I started this like a year ago. I can't figure out this camera. Okay. And so I'm only like just over halfway through because I'm a total book nerd. And so I buy a new one before I finish the old one. But this is about a journalist in the 1950s. He was a white journalist, and he went to the doctor and got something. I don't know what it was, that some medicine he ingested, and it darkened his skin. Mm-hmm. And so he went and lived in the Deep South, kind of as just a migrating. He didn't have a job, but so I mean, it's just fascinating to see. He's lived his life as a white person, and then to see all of this, to witness it firsthand. And then he's a very good writer. Obviously, he was a journalist, so he shares all that in there. Anyway, it's an excellent book. So I just wanted to recommend that to people out there who are looking for a good read.
What was unique about him, he had a way out.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. And he acknowledges that in the book. There was one, I can't remember the details, but there was one incident where he wound up calling his white friend who knew what was going on and had him rescue him from a situation.
So he knew that he was not going to live his life that way.
Yep.
Imagine knowing that you will.
Yeah. It's that you can't change it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book, and I encourage you to finish it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have renewed interest now. I have so many books that I don't finish, and it's not because I'm not interested in them or because I don't enjoy reading them. It's just another book comes along, and I have trouble. I need to stick with one book until I finish it. But
I'm the same way. I find myself reading 2 or 3 books at once. Mm-hmm. Just it depends on the mood I'm in.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get a little heavy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm having a moment now where I'm feeling old, but Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book. I can't think of the name of it, but it's about the Africans who jumped off the ship that would rather die and drown than to become slaves. Mm-hmm. And their souls live under the ocean. Mm-hmm. So that book is so heavy. I have to be in that headspace to read that book. So, but it's pretty interesting.
So as a fellow military family, do you have, what are your opinions or thoughts on, I know they're looking at renaming some Army bases.
I had the experience. Now, we never lived on the base because I actually had a career with a corporate Fortune 500 company. Mm-hmm. And wherever my husband was stationed, they would transfer me to work. So I always had a career going. Mm-hmm. My funniest memories are, back in the day, they had parking spots for officers, right?
So they still do.
I would park in that, and you had a sticker on your car that said, you're an officer too.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you how many times I parked my car and some lady would say, you can't park in that space. Your spots are back there,
Yeah.
So I just ignore them and keep on walking. And I've actually had someone tap me on the shoulder. You need to move your car.
So my husband just recently had a similar experience, actually. We still have the parking, the signs in the parking lot, but we don't have the stickers on our car anymore. Because, it used to just wave you through the gate, but since 9/11, we all have to stop and show our IDs, so stickers are useless. So he parked in the colonel spot to go in and get his haircut. And he came back out, and there was a note on his window with the license plate written down and everything. And he's like, welcome, because we have out of state license plate, of course. I mean, we never, we're just from wherever. But it said, I just want to, welcome to the state. I just want to let you know you just took away a spot from a legitimate colonel, and you're not allowed to park here. It's probably some retired guy that doesn't know we don't have stickers anymore, I guess. I don't know, but
every time you go to the commissary, somebody would point out, this, you're not supposed to be there. Or I would always like it. I used to participate in the Officers' Wives programs. I'd always make sure I did, but inevitably it would just be like, oh, you must be Major Taylor's wife, or you must be Captain Taylor's wife. I'm thinking, well, who else could I be? You know, he's
Yeah.
the only black pilot in the
Mhm.
squadron. So
Mhm.
it's probably me. But, you just kind of get used to it. Or back in the day, you could write a check at the BX.
Mhm.
So I would try to write a check at the BX, and they'd ask me for my ID and all that information. We used to have our social security numbers printed on our checks
Mm.
back in
Mhm.
'92. And it always would end up, somebody would say, just a minute, I have a check here in the amount of $300, but she's an officer's wife. So they would cash my check, but
Yeah.
it just got old, and I never really wanted to live on the base because
Mhm.
it was just too much coming at you.
Mhm.
And between my husband having to deal with it at work and me having to deal with it at work, we just found our own little oasis
Mhm.
away from the base.
Yeah.
So we could just be. And
Mhm.
we both wouldn't have to come home to it.
Right. Right.
But I have, people, you asked this question, what's racism like around the country?
Mhm.
Um, like I said, I grew up in the South and I knew the rules. If somebody was flying the Confederate flag, you better not walk in their yard. You don't make a mistake. If they had the little black yard jockey with the white lips, that's another place you don't go to. You
Didn't know that those either. I'm learning so much. There's a lot of things I don't know.
have you ever seen a little hitching post? The little
Mm-mm.
man that stands in the yards with a lantern, and well,
No, I haven't.
in
Sorry.
Kentucky, you'll see a lot of those yard
Okay.
jockeys. And depending on how they have their yard jockey painted, that was a no go. And the
Oh,
Confederate flag too.
yeah.
One of my grandfather's friends asked him one time. He says, "How come you people don't stop at my garden shop out in front of my farm?" He sold peaches and green beans and all those things. And my granddad did too, but
Mhm.
different crops. And so my grandfather told him, well, if you stop flying that Confederate flag, then they feel more welcome to come buy your produce. And he said, well, Mike, that is just crazy. That doesn't make any difference. He said, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
He took down his Confederate flag, and then as people would leave my granddad's farm where they would fish and get different types of produce, they would also stop at his orchard and get peaches and apples and that sort of thing. And he said, "How come I didn't know that?" He said, "Well,
Well, so what baffles me is there's still people that don't get that
yeah,
topic. I I totally understand, why the Confederate flag is hurtful, and it's not what we. I don't understand the people on the other side of that though, and I've tried. That's in my self education, I'm trying to go. Okay, why do people take pride in that flag? As near as I can tell, I think it's like a history of my great grandparents or whatever served in the war. It's kind of a military thing. But even so, I just feel like there's no excuse for that. I don't know. I have a hard time seeing
yeah."
the other side on that issue.
And this was in the mid '60s, and
Mhm.
he said, "I never knew that, so I'm going to tell my friends." That was why. You don't go where you're uncomfortable and people are making a statement. Like
Yeah.
so. And even to this day, there's a gentleman down the street from me that sells fresh eggs and goat's milk. I
Mhm.
would love to have some fresh eggs and goat milk to make soap, but
Mm.
I don't dare pull in his driveway. I just
You
don't.
don't think he wants to find out the truth either?
It's not my job to help.
Yeah. Yeah. Let somebody else go.
I did help one professor at the University of Kentucky. Um, I got to college at 17,
Mm.
and it was a political science class, and and he was giving his little talk, and he says, "Well, how many of you are registered, or how many of you voted this year?" And of course, couldn't vote because I wasn't 18.
Mm-hmm.
He came off that podium. He said, "You mean after all that you niggers went through to get the right to vote and you're not voting?" And I was just like, and the people had told me, don't take his class. He's a racist. He flunks all the black people, don't. But I had to have his class, right? So after class, I went up to him and I said, "Professor Von Blaken, I just want to share something with you." He said, I said, "Black people don't like to be referred to as niggers." He said, "Well, that's what I've always called you." I said, "Well, this is the 70s, and you can call us Black or African American, and I just think it would be so much better for you to just stop calling us niggers." He said, "Do you think that's the reason I've been voted the professor with the least amount of soul year in and year out?"
Didn't know that was a thing.
So afterwards, whenever he would give a lecture and he would start into civil rights and he would say, "And the blacks," isn't that right, Miss Watson? But, I got out of his class with an A. And it was just the fact that he honestly did not know.
Mm-hmm.
So he was open to me telling him, just stop calling us niggers,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the case too, even with issues today. Is Tony and I had a conversation yesterday about like, I'm not sure which word to use, and I've talked to some of my other white friends and we're like, we don't want to say the wrong thing. It's like, so, I think there's still confusion like that where we still just need to have open communication of, what's what, so that, because I want to speak to everybody and about everybody with respect and with compassion. But sometimes I lack the words just because I don't know. So,
I don't have a preference. I'm African American and I'm Black, so I'm not really stuck in that box, so to speak. Sometimes my husband would be contrary and he would just select other,
Yeah.
That's a problem at the University of Kentucky for us now, because when I first went there, there was about 32,000 students and about 600 others. And that included Black people, Orientals, people from Iran, Iraq. And so we were just all in that other box. And now, when they try to get in touch with us, we're not on the list. We're not on the Black Student Union list as we should be, simply because they weren't keeping records like that at that time. So it's funny.
So how is all the recent developments and the current events, how is that affecting you and your family, or what are your thoughts, your feelings about that?
Well, I live in constant fear anyway. And even though the Bible says you shouldn't, you still have a mother's heart. I have a son who's about 6'3" tall, and he's an MMA fighter, so he's bulked up.
He's bulked.
And so he's always the first one in the crowd that the police go for, because they have that mentality: if you get the biggest one, the rest of them will fall in order. And so we've always had to talk. His dad was a large man, so he always had to have the talk with him. Don't be loud, don't be aggressive. Yes sir, no sir. Just be that way. But it's still hard today when you see those things. Now, it's not the first time I've seen that sort of thing. I've seen people hanging from a tree. I've seen, my dad and grandfather, they would tell stories where they actually went to the war and they fought, and then they come home wearing their uniform and they get beat up and take their uniforms taken and burned. So you go to fight, you serve your country, but you have no rights. You can't even vote.
It's like both sides are the enemy. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah. And my dad would tell the story of how you can't even ride on the train. The prisoners of war got to ride up front on the train. and the black soldiers had to sit in the back, you know. So it's just what I'm seeing now is not new to us. But what I feel like I'm in, you ever see the movie Groundhog Day?
Yeah.
That's how I feel. And
Mm-hmm.
the pain is always the same, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
you feel like I don't want to go through this again,
Mm-hmm.
but here it comes again, and then all those feelings just come crashing down on you. So you're back to, getting back to the Lord. And I just pray the same prayer all the time, please be a fence all around my children, because it's difficult, and my kids wanted certain little cars when they were coming up because their friends had them. But my experience with cars was so horrible, and my husband's experience was so horrible. But we wouldn't buy those cars for my kids. My husband had a Corvette, and I had a BMW in 1983, and it was at least once a week one of us got stopped by the cops, not for any particular reason, just to make sure we're driving our car. So we just kind of brought that to us. And when my son said he wanted a Mustang, it was like, oh no, you're not getting a Mustang. I want a red car. No, you're not getting a red car. So, we have all these little classifications and things. It's kind of like bowling. You ever taken children to a bowling alley and they have the little rails where the ball stays on the lane?
Yep.
And that's kind of how we had to raise our kids, don't go off the rails, stay in the lane. And these are the things you don't want to do. So when I see all that's happening today and the explosion of frustration hits the streets, I'm not surprised, because like I said, I'm in Groundhog Days. I lived through uh, the worst riot in Louisville that I can remember was the day Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the city burned, I remember Rodney King's trial, or excuse me, the officer's trial. LA burned. So it's not, like I said, it's Groundhog Day.
It's not new to you.
It's not new to me.
Do you feel like there is anything different this time? It seems like the protests and the outcries are more widespread. It's more of a global
And that
thing now. Does that give you more hope than usual?
that's technology.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, white people love their dogs. They love their animals. They love their pets. And most of them wouldn't be so cruel to a dog.
Yeah.
And you think about, I can't call his name, but there was a football player who was fighting his dogs for few years back, and they sentenced him to 2 years in prison for fighting his dog. And so what white people got a chance to experience on that video is what we have seen over and over and over. And when we would tell people, we're exaggerating, we're playing the race card, no, that didn't happen. So we were always negated with everything. But what happened with that video, white people were sitting at home and they were watching that, and they were horrified, because they wouldn't treat a dog that way.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's happening is you're seeing people who felt it. People felt that man's cries. He knows he's dying, and I don't know if he saw his mother. He may have seen his mother coming from him because he was so close to death, and he cried out for his mother. But people saw it, Liz, and they felt it. And that's why you see all kinds of people in the street, because they saw it and they felt it. Whereas before, what you'd automatically hear is, you guys are playing the race card. No one could possibly have done that. That's unreal. I don't believe it. My girlfriend and I that I went to college with, we're still friends to this day. I would always make her go into the restaurant first, because if I went in, we don't have a table for an hour, right? So they'd say, I'll take your name, just sit over there, we'll call you. I'd send my girlfriend in, and there's a table ready. already. So, after about 4 or 5 times, she says, I just don't believe that. You're just exaggerating. So then we just started doing an experiment. And she was like, yeah, okay. So she would always go in first and get us a table. We never had to wait. And so that's a way to discourage us from eating at those places. If you tell us there's an hour wait, we'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, we know the game, we've lived it, but it's hard for you all to process it because you don't get treated that way.
Right.
And so in your minds, you're thinking nobody would treat another person like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in Memorial Day, everybody got to see a person treat another person that way. And it just really hit the soul of America, I think, which is why there's so many other people out there marching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I read the story too of Emmett Tillman. Is that his last name?
Emmett
Till,
T-I-L.
Yeah, Tillman. It was a 14-year-old kid who was lynched and horribly murdered and thrown in the river. And they found his body. I'm sure you know all this, but I'm saying it for the audience or people who don't. They sent his body back to he was from Chicago and he had gone down south somewhere and sent his body back to his mom with the coffin nailed shut. And when she got it, she said, I want other people to see what I had to see. And so she had an open casket at the funeral and they published the pictures of this young boy just completely disfigured in the papers. And there was a huge outcry because it's like, oh, now I see it for myself.
Yeah.
So, even back then, I think technology was a thing. But one thing in particular about this current one and I think I mentioned this yesterday, but just that the officer had his hands in his pocket. Sometimes you can go, okay, well, maybe the police officer thought he was in danger or what. But if you have your hands in your pockets, you're not feeling threatened.
You're
just being cruel.
It's another day, and this is the term that I'm from the old South. It's called picnicking, and it really comes from picnicking. Okay, so that's who you're going to kill today. So he was basically picnicking that day with his hands in his pocket, and so I feel you. He didn't care. And that was his goal, was to kill him, because there's no reason to put your knee on somebody's neck who's handcuffed on his stomach, and then you have two other people laying on him too. But that was his goal. And who's
and what struck me is that they stayed on. If I'm getting my facts right, tell me if I'm wrong. But they stayed on him even after he passed out, and they called the ambulance. Like, if you call an ambulance to help somebody, shouldn't you be doing some sort of first aid for them? Not.
Go back and watch that video.
Yeah.
Okay. They were not ambulance workers. They were policemen. You don't see.
Oh, they called other. Okay.
What they did, they knew he was dead, and the crowd around them was getting just a bit hot.
Okay.
They called for an ambulance, and policemen were in that ambulance. There was nobody there, a trained medical professional, to bring this man, to revive this man, because they knew he was dead. If you go back and look at it, you will see two officers with guns and badges that come and pick him up like a piece of trash off the street and drive off with him. So they knew they had killed him on the spot. But there were people around saying, you're killing him. Stop, get off. And when they killed him, they knew he was dead. So they just had to make it look like they had some humanity left.
They had tried. Yeah, there was, even if, which I don't think you can, but even if you could somehow justify and say, oh, well, it was an accidental killing. Well, there was no attempt made to correct the situation to get help, to get first aid. And it's just so shockingly bad that it's like, it's here now. You can't look the other way or ignore or deny. I mean, this is just so blatant. But bringing that up also then, stirs up these other, lesser injustices that happen every day, like you said. And so that's one thing I'm trying to, search myself. And I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Like, okay, I'm not a police officer. And I want to be anti-racist, not just not racist. Did I get that right? I want to stick up for people and stand up for what's right. But I'm not aware of it. I don't see things in my day-to-day life and the places where I go and the things that I do. I can't think in my head of what would I do, just going about my normal day-to-day life.
You shouldn't. So, there's no reason in the world that you should be aware of racism, okay? Because it doesn't come at you.
Well, yeah, I know, but in terms of
an opportunity,
sticking up for somebody, or I just feel like it's not enough that I don't do it. I need to help stamp it out.
Yeah,
but I don't know how, because like you said, I don't experience it. And B, I'm not doing it, so I don't know where to find it to help stamp it out, just on a day-to-day basis, not the whole systemic basis. But
you pray, number one.
Yeah.
Okay. And you start with your children.
Yeah.
Because children do not come in the world with those
biases,
preconceived biases.
Yeah.
And if you raise, did you say 6 children?
8. There's 6 at home, but 8 total. So.
You raised 8 children to be Americans, and everyone as an American, then you've done a good job. You've done your part, and you pray for people who don't have access. You hear so much now about reparations and things like that. I don't want money for the blood of my ancestors. I just want to be able to pay a less insurance rate than you do. I just want to be able to get a mortgage and not have to pay 2 points higher than you because I'm Black. I want to move wherever I want to be without being harassed, without the homeowners association bricking over my driveway or something like that. You just want to be left alone. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you see it, you say something. If you're in a group of people and they're making fun of folks or telling a joke that's just not right, just be brave enough to say, God doesn't like ugly. That's all you got to say.
Yeah.
But
I think even in the military, and I've talked to some, like that panel I did on Monday, where I really think the military does do a better job of not tolerating racism or anything like that. So there's not a lot of that, I do live on base, and so my neighbors and the people I hang out with are a lot of military people. So they're just my husband and I were talking about the other day, he's been, if you count academy time, he's been in almost 29 years. And he's like, I've never heard somebody tell a joke, or say something that, where he would need to stand up and say, hey, we don't talk like that. He would have had that opportunity been there, but he says, nobody does that, where he works. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes hard to know.
Well, it's subtle,
Yeah.
Coming from Kentucky, I knew the signs. Okay. I recognized them. But, when I moved to Las Vegas, I would get things like I'd make an appointment with a customer and I'd show up and they'd say, hey, you don't look like you sound. Okay. And then I'd just play it off and say, well, I do have an accent. I'm from Kentucky, but I really know what you think. Or people would say things like, you speak so well. English is my first language. So why would I not speak English, Or the one I hated the most was I would bring my husband to different functions and people would tell me that my husband was well behaved. And that would just burn me, as if he's supposed to be hanging from the chandelier. It's like, your husband is so well behaved. And it's like, to me, it would be like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah. Well, and it's concealed as a compliment,
right?
But it's not.
Right. Or, my mother, she made all of our clothes because it was just difficult because you couldn't shop, couldn't try on clothes. And even today, I'll go in the store and people are following me around so close. Whenever I pick up something, they take it out of my hand and say, I'll put this in the dressing room for you. Or they subtly tell me, um, you're in the designer section. Well, yeah, okay. Or, you know, or one time I was in Neiman Marcus and I wanted to try on a pair of shoes. And the gentleman said, well, these are Stuart Weitzman. And I said, oh, yeah, I like them. They're like the ones I have on now, So you shouldn't have to say that.
Yeah.
But just for an instant, you just get to the point where I'm not going to take this off you. I really want the shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when, hey, my money is my money. And if you're going to treat me that way, I'm out. I'll shop online.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to shop here and I don't want you to help me at that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think that more of us really need to start putting our money where our mouth is.
Yeah.
So instead of marching and protesting, which is fine, peaceful protesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that the protests have been hijacked by the white supremacists who were destroying and shooting up people, putting the blame on us. That's sad, but that's part of the plan. So I think instead of us protesting now, we should just really protest with our dollars.
Mm.
What people don't realize is African Americans, if we pooled our wealth together, we would be the 16th largest nation in the world. And so if we stop spending our money the way we do, I think things would change because money does talk.
Yep.
And we need to figure out how to get back to the Black Wall Street in Tulsa. I don't know if you've heard about it.
I just read about that last week. I was watching a video and somebody had mentioned it, and so I'm like, I don't know what she's talking about. So I went and read it, and
A
that's
dollar circulated in that community 50 times.
yeah.
They had their own airport, doctors, lawyers, stores. They had everything. It was their community, and they were thriving and they were wealthy. But it was decided that they were moving a little too fast, and so they had to be destroyed. And it was some made up story about a boy stepped on a lady's foot in the elevator. So they came to the town. First, they looted it. They took the people's clothes. They took the Victrolas. They took whatever they wanted out of their homes. They shot most of them, and then they burned the town to the ground. So it was just another way to say you can't succeed.
Yeah.
We don't want you to succeed. And so this is what will happen. And I think we need to go back to that. Really, I really, really do. Not in a negative way or anything like that, but let's hold on to our money and spend it where we want it. Kind of work that way. Who knows? But I'm looking forward to things changing, even though I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day again. Just like Saturday night when that other young man got shot for sleeping in the Wendy's parking lot.
I couldn't even watch that one as it was unfolding. I'm just like, I'll read the headline later because I was just so weary from everything.
You just like, okay, well, I've seen this story before.
Yeah.
And you try to keep your kids in line because they grew up in this town. And so we would always tell them, you can't really do what your white friends do. Even though they're doing it, please, please, please don't do it because the consequences for you are a lot different than the consequences for them. And I saw it more so with my son in school. I mean, he came home, I guess he was in kindergarten, and he was just so upset because he had gotten demerits that day and had to go to detention. Now, how do you put a kindergartner in detention? Well, I just trotted on over to that school and I wanted to know why. Because when you put our children in detention, you keep us out of the classroom. So we're already behind. Okay. And the teacher said, well, we went outside and Tavon stepped in the snow. So I'm listening and like, what else?
Okay.
But she put him in detention for a day because he stepped in the snow. And that was in kindergarten. So he's already feeling like, I can't win, Mom.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he was in junior high, he rode his bicycle to the school. And his dad and I would always make sure he had a baseball cap on because it was hot. You don't want sunstroke. You don't want to wear your bike helmet. At least wear your hat. So we had gone to the Negro History Museum in Kansas City. And my husband had purchased the Kansas City Monarch hat for him. And he paid like $50 for it, you know. And my son was very proud of his little hat. So off to school he goes, riding his bike. And at the end of the day, he's walking through the halls. And the teacher says, take your hat off. So he takes his hat off. And then when he gets to the door to go out, he puts his hat on. And the teacher felt like he was being disrespectful. So he got detention and his hat was confiscated. Well, at this time I'm out of town, so I have to send my husband over there because my son is upset because he can't get his hat back. So my husband goes over to the school and the teacher says, well, he was being disrespectful because I told him to take his hat off and he did. But when he got to the door to go outside, he put his hat back on again. Now, how is that disrespecting her by pushing the door and putting his hat on, right?
Yeah.
So my husband said, I understand. Now I'd like to have my son's hat back. And she says, no, it's permanently been confiscated. And so that's one of the few times I've ever known my husband just to kind of come out of himself.
Yeah.
He said, you know what? I'm going to have to borrow your phone to call the police and report a theft. So I'm sorry.
He thinks quickly on the spot, doesn't he? He's got a couple of good answers.
So when he did that, she gave him the hat back. But why did something so trivial have to go that far?
Yeah.
So it's like you see our boys in that pipeline to prison from grade school. You know, it's always an infraction. It's something terrible. Okay. And it's sad, but you still have to give them that you are somebody. God loves you. What God has for you is for you. And don't let them steal your thunder because that's the process. The process is to make you feel hopeless. And people who are hopeless don't want anything else, you know? Yeah. And so our goal was to make both of them not feel hopeless no matter what.
That's wise advice. So if you could finish the sentence of, you know, I have a dream and, you know, what your dream is for future in America or worldwide,
you know,
how would you answer that?
I just dream that future generations will be treated equally. Not different, not special, just equal. That's all I want. Mm-hmm. That's all I want. If everybody's the same, everybody should be happy.
Yeah. I watched a really powerful video by T.D. Jakes earlier today. And he said it was similar to that, but he's like, you know, we're not saying, you know, we don't want to be, you know, arrested if something is going on, but he goes, but we just don't want to be tried on the sidewalk, you know, just not tried and judged and shot right there.
Yeah. And you think about it. The first thing the police union says is they deserve due process. Well, after you've killed somebody on the street, did they get due process? So, you know, they scream due process for themselves, but they don't offer it to us. Mm-hmm. And T.D. Jakes, he's right.
Yeah.
You know, nothing but fairness.
Well, I have hope because in Jesus that, you know, we can get there. And also I have a hope in future generations, you know, like we discussed, it's with the children and each generation kind of stands on the shoulders of the previous one. But we're out of time for today. I would love to keep chatting with you, but I really appreciate your willingness to come on here and share your story with us. And I know that takes a lot of guts and courage to do that. And thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for asking me, Liz. I appreciate it.
All right.
You.
All right. You have a blessed day.
You too.
Bye-bye.